In this video, you will learn how to create consent forms and collect participant consent using Zamplo Research. Consent forms facilitate participant consent collection by enabling you to create and distribute consent forms to participants in-app. With Zamplo Research, you can attach consent forms to collect consent once per survey instance, or per participant. It's important to note that consent forms can only be directly linked to surveys, but also impact routines data and participant overview screens. If a study is only using routines to capture data, and you are collecting participant consent through Zamplo Research, you will need to send a welcome survey with a consent form. This will indicate whether participants consent to include their data in exports. To get started, log into Zamplo Research and select the study profile from the top drop-down menu. Click on the Study Setup drop-down from the main menu. Select Consent Forms. Here, you will find any consent forms you create. The consent forms you see were created by the study team for this specific video. If you're going to create a consent form, you should decide on the type of consent form you want to create. Some examples include consent to participate in the study. This is a one-time consent form. Consent to be contacted in the future once the study is completed. Consent to share data for research. This type of consent form is relevant if you are using surveys for clinical care and would like to export participant data. Consent for a specific survey. Optional surveys that the Ethics Review Board has identified as requiring separate consent. We will be going through these examples at the end of this video. To add a new consent form, click on Add New Consent Form. The first section is the consent form details. Begin by adding the consent form name. Add a description of the form for participants to read. Create the consent prompt for this form. The second section is consenter identification information. This section begins by identifying whether the consenter is consenting for themselves or on behalf of someone else. You can set up what fields to include based on what the consenter previously selected. Fields can include name, email, phone number, relationship to participant, if the consenter is consenting on behalf of someone else, and any other fields you would like to add. The third section is information sharing. Here you have the choice of selecting two options. The first, consent is required before inclusion in exports. If this option is selected, consent will be required to export a participant's data. The second option, consent is required before inclusion in participant overview. If this option is selected, consent will be required to see a participant's overview screen, which includes surveys and routines history, appointments, and participant events. To learn more about the participant overview screen, watch our Manage Participants video. The fourth section is Schedule and Order. Here you can determine the order for consent forms. Forms with lower values will appear first to participants. Please note that if you create and save a consent form, but don't publish it yet, you can edit the consent form to choose what order it gets placed in relation to other consent forms you create. Select when to get consent. Only once per user, only once per assigned survey, every instance of assigned survey. Select where the consent form should be shown. Every survey. Note, if you select this option, once the consent form is published, it will automatically be configured to appear on your draft surveys. If you would like to remove the form from a survey, You cannot do so through the survey feature. You will have to edit the form draft and select the Manually Assigned Surveys option. Once you publish the survey, the consent form will appear to participants when they go in to fill out the survey. Manually Assigned Surveys. Note: if you select this option, once the consent form is published, you will have to manually select what survey you would like the form to appear on. You will do this by selecting the consent form name when creating a survey. Once you publish the survey, the consent form will appear to participants when they go in to fill out that survey. To learn how to set up surveys and attach a consent form to a survey, watch our surveys tutorial. The fifth section is non-consent behavior. Here, decide what occurs to surveys and the participant account when a participant does not consent to a form. If a participant declines consent, how will it impact the current survey? Stop survey, continue survey. How will it impact future surveys you have scheduled? Stop all future surveys scheduled. Stop the current survey schedule for the survey you attach the form to. No effect. Future surveys will continue to go out as scheduled. How will it impact the participant account? You can choose to withdraw a participant from the study, have no effect on the account, exclude the account from your data exports, exclude information from participant overview screens, exclude from both participant overview screens and data exports. Once you're done setting up the consent form, you can save or save and publish it right away. You may choose to only save the consent form for now if you will be creating more consent forms and would like to publish them at the same time, or if you would like to edit the consent form later. If you choose to save and publish the consent form right away, you will not be able to edit the consent form again, only disable it. From the main consent forms page, you can see the forms you have drafted and published. For consent forms you have drafted, if you click on the three dots, you can edit, publish, or delete the consent form. For consent forms you have published, if you click on the three dots, you can view or disable a consent form. If you disable a consent form, you have the option to view the form or publish it again. Please note that once a consent form has been published, you cannot edit it, but you can disable it. A consent form must be published first in order for you to add it to a survey. If you disable a consent form, it will automatically be removed from the survey it is synced to. Since published consent forms cannot be edited, if you would like to change the contents of a consent form, you will have to disable it, create the consent form again, and publish it. Now that you have set up your consent form, you can add it to a survey. To learn how to set up surveys and attach a consent form to a survey, watch our surveys tutorial. Now that we've gone through how to create a consent form, let's go over 4 common use cases and how to set them up. Number 1, informed consent form. If you're collecting study consent through Zamplo Research, you should create an informed consent form. This form is sent to participants at the beginning of a study. You can choose to receive informed consent once per participant or every time a participant proceeds to take a survey. When creating this type of consent form, please note that for the Schedule and Order section, you must indicate when to get consent. If you select once for every user, the form will only show up once for a participant. Please note that if they have more than one initial survey to complete, the consent form will appear on the first survey they click on, regardless of which survey it is. If you select every instance of assigned survey, participants will need to fill out the consent form every time before they proceed to fill out the survey. Non-consent behavior. Declining consent should be set to stop survey, as those participants that do not consent cannot proceed with the survey. It will also stop all future surveys and withdraw participants from the study. Number 2, Consent to future contact. If you wish to collect consent for contacting a participant after the participant completes the study, you should create a consent to future contact form. This consent form should be coupled with the previous consent form. This type of form should be set to appear after an informed consent form. When creating this type of consent form, please note that for the information sharing section, the checkboxes, consent is required before inclusion in exports, consent is required before inclusion in participant overview, should not be selected. For the schedule and order section, the priority of this consent form should be set to a higher value than the previous consent form, as this consent to future contact form should appear after the informed consent form. Select once per user and every survey so participants only get the form once. For the non-consent behavior section, in this case, declining consent should be set to continue survey, as it allows participants to proceed with filling out the survey. It will have no effect on future surveys or the participant account. The only effect it has is on future contact. Number 3, consent to share data for research. This type of consent form is used when researchers and clinicians are using surveys for part of clinical care and would like to gather participant consent to use participant data for research purposes. The difference between this type of form and the informed consent form is that participant consent is required for researchers and clinicians to export participant data. When creating this type of consent form, please note that for the information sharing section, the checkbox consent is required before inclusion in exports should be selected. The other checkbox, consent is required before inclusion in participant overview, should not be selected. For the non-consent behavior section, in this case, declining consent should be set to continue survey, as it allows participants to proceed with filling out the survey. It will have no effect on future surveys. However, it will impact the participant account. Exclude from exports should be selected. Please note that there's currently no way to exclude data from only a single survey. If participants decline consent for this form, then no participant data can be exported. Number 4, consent for specific survey. If there is a survey that requires consent in addition to the study consent, and you need to ensure that the survey results cannot be viewed or exported by clinicians or researchers, then a consent for specific survey form should be created. This consent form is used if there is a survey submission that has been identified by the Ethics Review Board as requiring a separate consent form, besides a general informed consent form. This might be the case if there are surveys that feature questions regarding the study staff or care provided. For the following example, we will also configure the survey to allow only the Zamplo team to access participant survey submissions for a specific survey. The Zamplo team would scrap the data and give the study team the results. If a participant does not want the clinician to see the results, set up the survey with the following. Schedule and order. Consent is required every single time a participant fills out a survey instance. When to get consent should be every instance of assigned survey, or once per user, depending on the decision of the Ethics Review Board. Where should consent form be shown should be manually assigned surveys. Non-consent behavior. In this case, how should declining consent impact the current survey should be stop survey. For future surveys, if consent is being collected every instance of assigned survey, then you can either select Stop Current Survey Schedule to prevent the participant from seeing future surveys, or No Effect if you want to ask the patient for consent in the future. If consent is being collected only once per user, then you should select Stop All Surveys. Consent is required for clinicians to access the participant's overview. How should declining consent impact the participant account should be no effect, as the consent is for the survey and not the study. Note: to ensure that the study team cannot export the survey data or see the survey results on the participant overview screen, when you set up the survey, make sure the Data Privacy, Exclude Survey Results from CSV Exports and Participant Overview Screens option is checked. To do this, navigate to the survey you will be syncing with this consent form. Click on the 3 dots beside the survey draft and select Edit Survey. Make sure the Exclude Survey Results from CSV Exports and Participant Overview Screens is checked. Save the survey. Here is the participant preview for the Consent for Specific survey form we have just created. To learn more about Zamplo Research, such as managing participants, setting up surveys and routines, and exporting data, watch our other tutorials.